the system, oh, they're gonna provide me a system that day.
And it may be somebody that has a clue about how to run your class.
The one that is gonna be in there has like helped in my class some when I met. So that's the good thing. But my kids are out of their routine because I don't have somebody to work with them. So they're all one-on-one. Oh, go ahead, first grade. I'm feeling it. And
I bet you they picked you because they knew you had everything.
Well, I ran out of my medication. No, I didn't run out of my medication. Getting out of my system. That's the anti-anxiety medicine. Luckily, I found it when I got home. Probably when I thought it would take me a second. So I can handle the stress. Between now and Friday, I gotta write it out.
Well, we're kind of on the road.
And then it showed up in the room.
Hard kid.
Somebody.
So does that
Her, it's just that email, hers is about to expire, so she's a new student to me because she was in pre-K last year. So I had her now about, well, progress reports went out yesterday, so that's when I told her halfway. It was the first time, so. But I guess I'll do that in my sleep. And I'll be there at school this weekend. Till we get through Tuesday. We may not learn anything after Tuesday either, because I may be spent. Here I'm saying all the stuff, nobody here.
Trust me.
I'm standing way up here. Years, I think we do.
Yes, Justin. That's what, Justin Staker, that's what you're doing.
I feel my not.
I was gonna say, I think Audrey does it, I'm not sure. But I know Justin.
I've been diagnosed with MS. I've had 26 years now. And I'm getting the double vision.
What do you think, Brian? Georgia for the national title this year?
It's like moving around.
Ohio State.
Neither us or them.
He could probably stand there and hold you real quick.
Can't see Ohio State with it.
No, I've lost like on the way home. Yeah, real loose.
Is playoff DC from Ohio State?
I forget where.
Yeah, I'm getting my neck on, yeah.
I don't think he came. I think he's from Ohio State, then.
Is Justin still coming to y'all's house every week or so?
Yeah. Right, he was on Silverfield's show.
Was he?
Yeah.
That's true. They'll come in and do it too.
Yeah.
Y'all doing all right?
Yeah.
We're gonna go take that picture. The oldest one is now my height. He's about 6 foot.
I don't see any gray.
I was a sub sandwich.
I work too. I've all across a bunch of.
Yeah, right.
Sunday that. Right?
Ryan.
I guess you do.
But there I got a few apples, though, but not many. Apples and pears, there's like some individual things. I've frozen some.
Those
ice
are all
cream.
our grandchildren.
All but one.
That was when we only had 5 and they only have 6.
I have frozen some pineapples.
She has 3. She's the middle daughter. Our youngest doesn't have
And they had the little green beans and roast those and my dad.
Right. Everybody. Brent has 3
And
boys.
so, it's like, yeah,
He's the oldest.
all that,
I had to leave. They're still talking. I gotta use the restroom.
Yeah, that's very.
Wondering what's in here. What's the?
I did have some cheddar cheese, sticks, you know, and every day instead of string. Oh, okay. Yeah, it doesn't matter. And the last stuff, they gave us chocolate paste today. So she wanted hot cheese, must be it was like one large. Oh, I have one that's gluten free. Cinnamon sticks.
She's declined.
Got one of these? But actually,
All right. Most of us are here. Some of the middle people are here. It's good to see everybody tonight. We're going to go ahead and wrap up the lesson on the God, Science, and Origins, and then Sunday be ready to do the start with the lesson on Age of the Earth, and Carrie will be speaking on that. And that's where we get more into the details. Right now, we're still talking philosophically and trying to establish the groundwork of what the study's all about, and the different factions, if you will. But once we get into the Age of the Earth, I've read ahead a little bit. That's where we're getting to some of the evidences that are strongly in favor of a designer. And that's really what we're talking about. This is a study of evidences of God and evidence of the Creator. And there's evidences that are there, and they can be interpreted a couple of ways. But in this case, the interpretation towards the design of a creator or a cause, as he talks about in today's lesson, is much stronger. And it's funny how it is so strong, but people end up, having a belief and just will not accept that this is a possibility. And that's where we get some of the who's got singing going on? Oh, Ryan's doing that. There. I thought we had a join. But anyway, and so what we're looking at is, as we go through the study, is trying to figure out and look at the evidence, the data, and that's what a scientist should be doing. They should just look at the data and then try to figure out what is the cause, because we can't go back and recreate the origins. We can't do it. They only had one beginning for the whole, the universe and so on. But we can look at the evidence, and this is what's amazing. Again, it's what's amazing to me. Scientists will do that for almost everything. They'll look at the evidence, and they haven't always done that recently with some of the stuff that's come out with the experience we've had with COVID. But the point is normally scientists will look at the evidence and just go wherever it takes you. But when you got preconceived ideas, then you can't do that, and that's where I think we have some issues, and that's why we have this start, if you will, that we've been going through the last couple of weeks of trying to say, here's what one side thinks, here's what the other side thinks, and then again, starting this coming Sunday, we're going to start getting into some of these evidences. Some of them will amaze you because you never heard of them, because that's one thing they do. They don't let it get out. Have you heard about the footprints of man that have been found with footprints of dinosaurs? And when they date them, they come out exactly at the same time. That's impossible. If you believe man and dinosaur were millions of years apart. But now you may have heard that because we talk about it. But most people who have no clue about that. And that type of data is suppressed. And so that's what the book goes into, showing us a lot of data like that. Another one, well, let's give you a preview, is the fossil record. We've all looked at the fossil record and think, wow, that proves evolution. In fact, it disproves it, because you have in the fossil record, in the strata, rock strata, you'll have the fossils and so on. You'll have a tree standing, and there's strata all around it. And there's different levels of fossils. They say that there are different years for these fossils. I even question that. But nonetheless, you have the strata. We've all seen the strata. But this tree standing there, you don't see about that. Now, how could that even happen? How could that happen? If this strata took millions of years to develop. That tree stood for 1 million years or 1 million years plus. Again, you don't know about that because they don't want that to come out, because that just blows away their theory or their interpretation of the evidence. The fossil record is evidence. We can't deny it. And I advocate dinosaurs are evidence. But it depends on how you look at it. And so right now we're just kind of going through getting the two sides, if you will, established. Starting next week, we'll be getting into the more details. And so I'll ask you to bear with us. There's other books we could have chosen. This one looked to be pretty good. It's the first time we've done this book. And so you're kind of guinea pigs. So if it doesn't do what we're looking for, then we're teaching the same topic next quarter. And we may switch to another book. But I think it's going to get us there, because what I really like about this is we've been needing this a long time. Buddy Payne came and talked to us. I think you were talking about it Kurt a while back, and he talked about some of the things that we don't hear, like how finely tuned the universe is. Just a little bit of a change, we wouldn't even be able to breathe. I mean, he talked about then at the macro, then he got down to the micro, and it just screams design. It doesn't scream, it just happened. And that's really the theory of evolution, or people that believe in evolution. All right, so that kind of gives you some of the flavor where we're thinking of where this I hope this goes.
You know, for years.
Go ahead, Phil.
Crossing the ocean, they were having a lot of sinking ships. And somebody read in the Bible about the paths in the sea.
Paths of the seas.
And they found those and they sailed in that path.
Yeah, we call it the Gulf Stream.
Yeah.
And that's another thing is the Bible is not a scientific book. It's not a science book. But God uses nature and science to make his points. And why do you think he does that? Do you think he knows a little bit about it? Yeah. I mean, it's just like for God, and that's where I think sometimes I know I get mixed up. For God, it's just fact. I mean, the paths of the sea. He just mentioned, I believe that was in Job, and he mentioned the paths of the sea. And we had no idea what he's talking about until about the 1800s when we found them. And it's the Gulf Stream, it's the currents. And there's a lot of them. And so I always say this, we started in class, we're always just catching up to those kind of minute things God puts in the scriptures. And there probably are some more. And he does go into some of these in here too, but that again shows that the Bible was written. I mean, those words were written, over 2,000 years ago. And God knew about the paths of the sea because he created them, he made them. And so that's a great point. All right, before we begin, let's go to our Father in prayer. And Mark, would you lead us, please?
Yeah. Most gracious and loving Heavenly Father, we thank you so much for this opportunity for us to gather here this evening and study your word, to study and know that you created this world and the heavens and the earth. Heavenly Father, we thank you so much for this time that we have. Thank you for your word, and that through your word our faith is made stronger. Be with us, dear Lord, and help us to take this lesson to our hearts and be stronger and be able to reach out to others with our stronger faith. In Christ's name we pray, amen.
All right. Talk about quickly some challenges that we face. Go over to page 13. I know it's still on the first lesson. There's a couple of things I want to bring out. Intellectual roadblocks and discrimination. This is kind of what I was talking about. One way to put away discussion that you don't want is to not let it get out. Is just squelch it. And this has been going on in colleges and universities for quite a while now. And it's filtered down to the high schools and other education too. And it's not every place, but it's very, very much the majority. But what you end up with is it's a form of discrimination, because if you have a different idea about, in this case, origins or the way the world is created, they don't want to talk about it. They don't want to consider it. A true knowledge seeker or scientist would want to say, let's listen to all theories on this. Now, in fact, they go beyond that and say there is one theory, and it's not a theory, it's a fact. And they call it evolution a fact. And they even go beyond that and say, if you don't believe that, then you're just a caveman, or you're not much of an intellectual. And that's why, like I said last Sunday, yeah, maybe it was Sunday, but yeah, where I even experienced that. I'm talking, my goodness, this is back in the early 80s, maybe late 70s, when I'd gotten my degree, had a degree in biology. I was working as a OSHA inspector in Louisville. And they wanted people with, the thing I was doing was industrial hygiene, which is like safety, but I would go into various places and look for problems with noise, dust, fumes, things that took a little bit more science, just observation and studies. And I did monitoring and things like that. Well, anyway, they wanted people that had a biology, chemistry, or engineering degree for these fields. So I had a degree in biology, and I thought, well, I've never even heard of this field, but you know, it ended up being my career. But nonetheless, I was with a guy. His first name was John. I can't remember his last name now, but we talked one day. We both went to Kentucky, so we were both in some of the same classes, or at least I was a little bit ahead of him, I think. Anyway, we got talking one day. I don't know how it brought up, but we got talking in the office about evolution. I said, well, I don't really believe in the theory of evolution. He said, it's a pretty weak theory, in fact. And I mean, he was flabbergasted. He was a Baptist. He was a Baptist, but he was flabbergasted. He said, what? You have a degree? How did you get your degree in biology without believing in evolution? I said, because I looked at what they were saying and recognized it was a theory, and it was a weak theory. And I mean, he was just floored. He said, I can't believe they gave you a degree. And nowadays, they probably wouldn't. I don't know. I'm glad I'm not there now. But that was a little bit of taste that I got, just a little bit. But it happens. One guy I read about, his name was Mike Adams. He's passed now, but he had a PhD in criminal justice. I think he was teaching at University of North Carolina, Wilmington, and he was an atheist. And he got his tenure, and then he started studying the scriptures and got to talking to people and became a Christian. They tried their hardest to get rid of him because he was pretty outspoken about some of those things, moral things. But the point I'm getting at is because he had tenure, they couldn't get rid of him. If he hadn't gotten tenure, and he knew it, if he hadn't gotten tenure, he would not have gotten. He would not have gotten tenure. He'd been gone. And so he wasn't a scientist, but nonetheless, that's the way these things. That's the way they do these things. So there are these intellectual roadblocks in discrimination. It's starting to lessen a little bit, but it's still very much prevalent. Now look at page 13. Here's this. I thought this was interesting. This is a fellow, Ernest Mayer, there at the bottom of the page in the italicized. Here's what he says. He says, evolutionary biology, in contrast to physics and chemistry, is a historical science, and that's true. You can't go back and recreate that. The evolution attempts to explain events and processes that have already taken place. Laws and experience are inappropriate techniques for the explication of such events and processes. Instead, one constructs a historical narrative theory consisting of a tentative reconstruction of a particular scenario that led to the events one is trying to explain. So he doesn't use the word theory, but he's saying you take what evidence you got and you construct, how's he put it, an explication of such events. But look what he says in the next paragraph. No educated person any longer questions the validity of the so-called theory of evolution, which we now know will be a simple fact. Now wait a minute, the same guy said this. At least be a little consistent. But this is where they go. They'll say that you really can't recreate the origin. So we have to only look at the evidence. But everyone knows that evolution is a fact. It's not. And it just drives me crazy that people accept that. But it's not. It is not a fact. And in fact, it's a weak theory when you really truly look at the evidence. All right. Theistic evolution. Does anyone know about this? Has anyone ever heard of theistic evolution?
Is it where
Go ahead, Mark.
it's like evolution, but I think people use it to say, well, this is how God created Earth and all. It's through evolution that evolution exists, but God created the evolution. Is that pretty much?
That's exactly it. Eric Wiley the other day was talking about how he when he talks to an evolutionist, he just keeps on pushing them back. Well, where did that come from? Where did that come from? Where did the Big Bang material come from? So on and so on. And you get into the thought about eternal being matter. We'll talk about that in a minute. I mean, matter being eternal. But then that was the way I always worked in my mind and sometimes challenged, oh, did you say it wrong? Sometimes challenged people that were evolutionists and atheists. Until I was in my freshman biology, and our teacher got up and she said, I'm a theistic evolutionist. And I thought, what? What's that? And she said, I believe in God. I went, oh. She goes, but I believe evolution is the way God created the world. That he just started the Big Bang, and then it went off from there. So she had a cause, the same cause we have. It's God. And I believe God did use a Big Bang. I mean, some of that had to be pretty explosive, but not the way they think. And so that's what theistic is. So that one throws you a little bit. And on page 41, we'll be talking about that. Because basically theistic evolution is trying to make a compromise. And we even have Christians that are doing that now. Trying to make that compromise because they're so enamored and convinced with the folks that are highly educated and allegedly know their stuff about evolution. They think, well, that's got to be the way it happened. And that's where you get the people who have the have you heard of the age theory for the creation, that each day was millions of years? Mm-hmm. And that's where you get, that's a theistic evolution type. The evidence doesn't show that. It doesn't show that. Ron, you had a comment?
That's what they were taught. Many years ago, Phil, you remember, we had a group come in and for a weekend thing about this very thing. They were Christians. There was 3 couples. And everything went really well until the last classes or sessions or whatever. And that's when they came up with, well, it appears that the first day was more like 1,000,000 years. I mean, they went through this whole thing for 2 or 3, and I said, this is really good. And then at the end, they just killed it. They killed it off. But we had them here, but nobody knew what they were,
right,
going to come up with. We had heard that they were very factual and very scriptural, but that's exactly what it came down to.
Okay.
Theistic evolution.
Well, and that can happen. That can happen. Mark?
It kind of goes back, like in the Bible where it says, and I don't get it exactly right here, where it talks about, to God, a day's like 1,000 years,
Right.
or 1,000 years is one day, because so it kind of, you got places in the Bible where time doesn't mean anything to God. And
Right.
so that's why people, I think, come up with this,
They do. They'll use that as a justification, but that's why it's important to look at the evidence.
Mm-hmm.
And the evidence is, and we'll be getting into it next week, the next couple Sundays. The evidence is so strong of a young Earth, so strong. All of the radioactive dating. It's funny. I've looked at this in somewhat detail, but it's been a while. But the radioactive dating, especially the carbon-14, it's really weird. It breaks down. It becomes really funky after about 14,000 years, 10, 14,000 years. And almost all the type of dating methods, they just seem, once they get past that time, they don't work right. They ignore it. Why do you think it's the case? What's one explanation for that happening? That's how old the world is. It wasn't here before then. To me, that's a way of looking at it. But it's funny because we've always relied on carbon-14 dating, and that is very accurate up until about, like I say, 10 or 14,000 years. And after that, they say just kind of the charts and the numbers just go all over the place. It can't go past that. Is really the way I look at it. So again, it's God doesn't look time like we do, but when he said it was a day, I think he meant a day. And to me, it takes away his power to say that it took him millions of years, But nonetheless, forget all of that. That's conjecture on our part. The evidence, and we're going to see this, I'm hoping as we go through this book, doesn't support that. the millions of years.
I was gonna say, you know, with the theistic evolution, if the day is millions of years, then you've got plants existing with no sunlight and no, you know, and no pollinators for the plants. For millions of years,
Cicely,
they
Cicely,
exist without sunshine.
Cicely, quit
So-
using common sense.
Sorry.
You are eat up with CS disease.
I'm glad
No,
you
exactly.
Yeah, working butterflies there.
Yeah, right. No, I mean, that's the point.
The other thing is that in the evening and
Right.
morning, on the first day, second day.
Right.
That just doesn't work with theistic evolution.
No, it doesn't, and it will, and now, here's the only issue I have with that. You gotta ask this question. Will someone who believes in theistic evolution go to hell? I don't think so. I don't think so, because they still believe in God. It's just that they're ignoring, I think, not just the evidence, but what God says in the first first couple chapters of Genesis. I don't know that, here's the way I look at that. As I think maybe Weldon Warnock one time said, that's whittling on God's end of the stick. So I don't know. I don't have an answer for that. But that's what's amazing, is that evidence does not go that direction. And we're going to get into that. We're going to get into that. I just wanted to make sure we all were familiar with the term theistic evolution, because we're going to be talking about that more as we go. Kurt?
So, not to beat this around much, but are we saying the theistic evolutionists basically bow down to the evolutionist side to shrug them off in some degree?
They pretty much, most of them, I'm going to generalize here, accept the theory of evolution. They that, and we're going to get into that just right now. We got macro versus micro evolution. Have you heard of these terms?
Mm-hmm.
All right, macro is from species to species. This is the evolution. Micro, so in one sense, evolution does occur. I mean, we all evolved. We all were a baby. We all evolved, and there's evolution, a lot of evolution of changes in species. I mean, like a lion and a cat, or a Chihuahua and a Great Dane. What are a Chihuahua and a Great Dane scientifically? Not dogs. What's the other word? Canines. All right. What about a lion and a cat, a house cat? Feline. But they're quite a bit of difference. That's evolution. That's change within a species. God allows for that, and He created that. And this right here what gets me. The study of genetics.
When Jonah was in the belly of a whale 3 million years, Christ was in the tomb
3 days.
3 days or 3
Yeah.
million years.
Well, again, God, like Mark said, time doesn't matter to God. However, He does know it matters to us, so He gives us time markers like that. Evolution is what people want to point to say, well, that's how we became. But the evidence doesn't show that. The evidence, it just doesn't show it. This is what I thought was interesting. Again, going back to my college freshman, we were studying evolution. And of course, she told us she was a theistic evolutionist. That just threw me for a loop. But and she talked about all the things we learned about in evolution. The chart you mentioned, Cecilia, with the ape and going up to the, and the missing links they've never found because they aren't there.
Well, one year in the Mid-South Fair, they had the missing link frozen in ice that Jimmy Duffy.
What it looked like.
Most of them are hoaxes. That's probably one of them. But this is what I thought was interesting. So I was listening to her, I'm thinking, well, okay, I'll regurgitate back on the test what she's saying. Don't believe it. But then it was 2 weeks later, maybe 3 weeks. We were studying genetics. That was the next topic. And it was amazing. The laws of genetics are set. I mean, they are unchangeable. And that's why we can make the hybrid corns. That's why we can breed different animals, because we know these laws of genetics and they do not change. So I'm thinking, no, this don't make sense. Again, using common sense, it hurt me. But I'm thinking, wait a minute. You just told us that evolution, macroevolution occurs when you got mutations and you got changes within species. And now you have going from the ape to the man and so on. But now you turn right around and tell me that there is no change, and you can take genetics to the bank. And because they don't change in species, and these laws that we now have learned, studies the laws of genetics, we can predict a lot of things, and they always come true because those laws are set. And so I'm thinking, well, this don't make sense. How come you think that? I mean, that's what amazing to me. How come you're able to talk about that in detail, but then right before or after say, now forget all of that, we're going to talk about evolution, and there is change in species. And that's like, it doesn't make sense. And this is another thing that I learned and they don't say. Almost every mutation that occurs, not almost, I think there's probably no mutation that occurs that's helpful. They're almost always a problem or some kind of deformity. A lot of times Yvonne and I suffered 2 miscarriages. I believe both of those were deformities. There's mutations there, and they generally can't survive. That's generally what happens. And so with mutations, you don't go from one species. It isn't something that's beneficial. Rarely is it beneficial. And so nonetheless, we got to make sure we keep these terms separated, because there is evolution in a species, but not evolution between species. And that's the way they want things to go. All right. So there's 2 basic schools of thought. That gets us to I think where we're at now. The 2 schools of thought are that he calls it naturalism, materialism, or evolution. And I would call this atheistic evolutionists. They believe matter is eternal. That's important to understand, because that's how they can explain where did the Big Bang come from. Well, it was always just here. Matter was always here. The other school of thought is that there's a designer. It's creationism. That matter is not eternal. That matter had a beginning. It was created. And so then with those 2 schools of thought, then you look at the evidence. And that's what we're going to be doing in the latter classes. Any thoughts on that?
I have a question.
Yeah.
How old were Adam and Eve when he created them?
Well, they were old enough to talk.
I mean, seriously, and then trees, you know, we count the age of trees with the rings, so how many rings were in those trees? God can make anything as old as he wanted to, and we just don't know that.
You know, Sandy, when you finally recognize you have a creator, and that's where we're going to try to get to tonight, is there is a creator, there is a designer, then all those questions are answered, because he's doing it all.
It doesn't matter, does it?
No, it doesn't. So now then that's where the evidence comes in that he's given us. He talks about that in several verses, that he's given us evidence to look at to show that he did all these things, that he created. Now, you know, were Adam and Eve adults? I think probably. I think a lot of the plants, a lot of trees probably already had age to them. Who knows? But, you know, they were actually brand new. But could God make them to where they had age to them? Sure he could. Sure he could, you know. But again, when you do the radioactive dating, it's really odd that it breaks down after about 10 to 15,000 years. That's really, to me, that's not odd, because I believe that's probably about how old the world really is. It's certainly not millions and billions of years old. Nonetheless, it's just, we'll get to that. But that's a fair question. But I think the answer is simply, God is the creator, so yeah, he can do something like that. He can create something out of nothing. And that's another thing we'll talk about in a minute.
And this has already been said, not today, but I think it's just important for us to remember that either one of those beliefs has to have a faith. You have to have faith in either one of them, because if you believed in evolution and matter is eternal, then it had to come, you know, where did it come from? And that's the same thing. Well, other people will say, well, where did God come from? Well, where did matter come from? Right. So both of those take a form of faith. So if somebody questions that, you can turn around and do the same thing with them.
I like the answer he gives to that question, where did God come from? And I guess you could say to the evolutionists, where did matter come from? He said, where did God come from? Is that's not the question to ask. He says, we argue that every dependent thing must have a cause. Okay, we're dependent. The cosmological argument, God is not dependent because he is a creator. The creator doesn't have to have a beginning. And so, it's not the right question to ask, because then you're saying, well, then who created him? And so, but it's not a matter of he's being created. We're the ones that were created. The world was the one that's created. The creator is a whole different ball of wax, if you will. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. All right. Look at these questions here, thoughts here. Go to page 23. He gives the cosmological, the kalam cosmological. I don't know why he puts that word in there. I mean, I didn't even look it up. Barely know how to even pronounce the word cosmological. I keep on thinking cosmetology. That's a little different. But kalam is medieval Islamic theology. Nonetheless, there's three premises, and it's just a scientific or a theoretic argument. Let's start with the third one. The universe exists. Let's go that way. The universe had a beginning. Whatever begins to exist had a cause. And so because it exists, it had a beginning. And this is something that nobody, even the atheist, will agree. The world, the universe had a beginning. Now, what they'll say, they believe matter is eternal, then God's not necessary. It is always just here. Okay? Again, that takes faith. That takes faith. Then, if that's the case, then they're saying macroevolution can be true, going from species to species, the way we talk about man evolving. However, it has not been proven true, and in fact is a weak theory. Go to page 24. That kind of middle paragraph there, where it says molecular biologist and physician Michael Denton summarizes this truth. Naturalism, that's evolution, is still, as it was in Darwin's time, a highly speculative hypothesis, entirely without direct factual support, and very far from that self-evident axiom some of its more aggressive advocates would have us believe. And then he's got more comments. I like the one over here on page 25, that other italic at the top. The conclusion of intelligent design flows naturally from the data itself, not from sacred books or sacred beliefs. The reluctance of science to embrace the conclusion of intelligent design has no justifiable foundation. Many people, including many important, well-respected scientists, just don't want there to be anything beyond nature, beyond matter being eternal, because that's where they got to go. And so some honest scientists, there are some honest scientists that, and this is someone we were reading here, are starting to admit, yeah, not only do we all agree, and that's one thing they do agree on, that there was a beginning. Now they agree on that, but they're starting to admit that there's just too much evidence, evidence screaming that somebody was designing this, there was thinking behind it. It's just not that possible for all this to have occurred through chance. And some of them are starting to recognize that it's going to still be a long time, because as he said there, they just don't want to be there to be anything beyond nature. And so you end up having to deny God, or whatever you want to call the creator is. We call it God, of course. Does this make any sense? I mean, what we're saying here is that with the first cause, there was something that was made. There is a beginning, and so because of that, then there has to be some kind of design, some kind of initiator, and that being God. All right. Now, what does science and reason actually show? The universe exists. Why? Why does the universe exist?
God created it.
That's it, Mark. So, something created. I know. I think you're thinking, is he thinking deep here? No. Believe me, when I ask a question, it's rarely deep, because I really can't get those answers. Scientists agree that the earth had a beginning. But how? And they have pretty much, you still hear about it, they have pretty much eliminated the Big Bang Theory. That isn't the way it happened. But I'm thinking, well, wait a minute. Then how did it happen? But nonetheless, they kind of eliminate that, mainly because, but they go back to saying, well, it's eternal, and the Big Bang might have been the way that the eternal matter exploded for some reason, but who knows about that? Now, this is what I thought was interesting. Get to some of the science, the evidences of the beginning. Look over page 26. This is interesting. I had never seen this, even though I had to take classes, which, by the way, I hated classes in radioactivity. I had to have it because I had to know that stuff for my job. But it is too much physics for me. But nonetheless, I did learn some of this, but I never thought about this. Look over there. Actually, it starts on the page of 25. First, if the Earth had no beginning, all radioactive material and isotopes that's naturally occurring, would be gone. And I know this, if I'm thinking about it, well, that makes sense, because elements break down based on half-life. Atoms of this proton, neutron, electron magnitude, combined with their instability, would have necessarily broken down smaller elements. That's what happens with radioactive material. It has a half-life. You've heard of half-lives, and that means that it has, we dealt with one that had a half-life, it was americium-241, had a half-life of 450 years, which is a relatively long one, although there's some longer than that. That means that for 450 years, it will still have the material still radioactive. Okay, but that means that for 900 years, most of that material would no longer be radioactive. It goes to americium-240, I think. But anyway, since these elements are still around, the Earth cannot be billions of years old, as the naturalists arrogantly posture. I never thought about that. These elements should not really be around because their half-life is, they especially with billions of years, maybe 10,000. There's probably a whole lot more radioactive material at one time, and some of it is created even now, some of the naturally occurring. But the point is I never thought about the fact that radioactive isotopes exist. That proves that's one evidence that that it isn't millions of years. I had not thought about that. The radiation heat signatures, I'd never heard of. That's on page 26. But basically, he's saying that scientists have seen that there's ripples and machining marks from the creation of the universe, and they're now trying to figure out what these are. These are probably something they're looking through their telescopes and things like that. This I'm not familiar with, but it is pointed out as evidence of the beginning. And then you have the belief that used to be in life coming from non-life, spontaneous generation. That's been pretty much taken away. No one believes in that anymore. But in 1800s, they believed that they thought, well, where does life come from? And one scientist postulated that he had this might have been in the 1500s. He had some raw meat in the corner, just dead. It was not living material. It was raw meat, still protein. And a few days later, there was maggots in it. He just assumed that, wow, life generates from inorganic material or dead material. What was the cause there? Flies laying eggs. And we learned that later. And the same thing, that's why I got I got another one was bread to mice. They had some bread, which again is not a living material, although we know it's protein and carbohydrates and so on. They didn't, but they noticed that mice came out of that bread. And the theory back then, this is the way back, was that, so living material could come from dead material. Well, it's not true. It's spontaneous, and we know that not to be true at all. But that was a theory for a long time. And then fourth, this one should stop everything. The second law of thermodynamics. All the physicists know this. Look over on page 27. And this is Joey Moyer, his explanation or his analysis. According to the second law of thermodynamics, processes that occur in a closed system tend toward a state of equilibrium under decay. We call it entropy. With no energy being fed into the system, everything would eventually burn up and wear out. So how does this help the believer's cause? Well, the question is simple. If given enough time, the universe would burn out and would reach heat death, then why hasn't it already happened? if it did not have a beginning. Assuming that the universe is infinite, it should have already burned out. Yet here we are. Here, unbelievers must propose a model that is neither scientific provable nor observed anywhere. The universe cannot be eternal. This law of entropy says everything in the universe is going to disorder. Now, it's taken a long time. We don't always see this happening, but that's pretty much true with all material and all matter. It's going to form a disorder. It's called entropy. Second law, and this is what's amazing. These scientists know this law, and they will use and make experiments based on this law. But then they'll turn right around and say that matter is eternal. It can't be. Not if this law is true. It can't be. And so again, here's another one that evidence, entropy, or second law of thermodynamics, that everything is going to a state of disorder slowly. How can that happen? And you still have matter being eternal. It can't. All right. So science and reason do not support that there was not a beginning, that matter is eternal, and that's true. And again, look at the bottom page, 27. For the scientist who has lived by faith in the power of reason, the story ends like a bad dream. He has scaled the mountains of ignorance. He is about to conquer the highest peak as he pulls himself over the final rock. He is greeted by a band of theologians who have been sitting there for centuries. And this is kind of sarcastic, but it's really where it goes. Again, and forget taking the scriptures, that's important. But just looking at the evidence, which is what we'll be doing as we get more into this class. Any thoughts? All right. Let's see here, we'll wrap it up here.
I'm just looking up the definition for the word infinite to make sure
Oh, infinite?
thought I knew of it. So that one sentence here on page 27 where it says, assuming that the universe is infinite, it should have already burned out. That already burned out, that's contrary to what the word infinite means.
Right.
I mean, that's
right, and that's what I'm saying. The second law of thermodynamics says everything is burning out. How can it be eternal if it's burning out?
Yeah.
It don't make sense. It's going to eventually have an end, and we know that. Who's promised that there's going to be an end? God. And that's it. I'll get off my soapbox here. All right, we're done.